I always knew I lived at a slight angle to the rest of my family, like a picture hung crooked in a hallway that everyone pretends not to notice. My parents, Marcia and Tom Bennett, are practical in that unshakable way of people who measure life in lists and polite silences. My sister Jenny, 2 years older, is the kind of person who collects conventional choices the way some people collect stamps. Neat, glossy, never out of place. Me? I fell hard for the ornate, the excessive, the things that felt like costumes for a private joy. I read footnotes for fun. I cried at a rococo painting once and apologized to it afterward. Those sorts of embarrassments. So when David asked me to marry him, it felt like the first time the world made a little extra space just for me. David, full name David Keith, because he likes formality the way I like gilding, is the kind of man who listens like his ears are a sanctuary. He didn't just tolerate my tastes, he admired them. He calls my obsession with rococo brave, and then pretends not to notice when I rearrange the cushions on his couch so the tassels face the correct way. We chose a tented garden venue because I wanted sunlight and the sky and the wild edging of nature to butt heads with gilded poles and ridiculously ornate fabric swags. I wanted the kind of wedding that made people say, "I can't believe she did it," and feel for once like the person doing it could breathe. Rehearsal day was a weather-perfect small panic. Chairs in neat rows, plates stacked like tiny altars, musicians tuning like conspirators. The tent poles, my favorite part, were carved finials with painted cherubs and spirals, and every time I walked past them, I felt like I was walking through a private museum I'd made myself. For a few hours, everything was exactly as I'd imagined. For a few hours, I was allowed to be the person I had always been at home only in the margins. Then Jenny arrived, late, breathless from doing 1,000 small errands and wearing a dress that could double as a tax return. Decisively beige, sensible, zero fuss. She stood at the edge of the tent, arms folded, and watched my decorations the way someone watches a street performer they think is a little too earnest. "This is a lot," she said, not as a question, but as a verdict. She made the word taste like sand. Isn't it a little, tasteless? It's so extra, Lisa. There are ways of saying you don't like something that feel like critique, and ways that feel like scissors. Jenny has always had the scissors. I felt a heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the summer, and everything to do with a catalog of small public cuts she'd made my whole life. The laughs at my hobbies, the way she'd told parents at parties I was eccentric. When I'd simply been enthusiastic, the single sentence that erased me from the story she wanted us all to be in. I answered before I could style my voice into restraint. "Tasteless?" I said, loud enough that the florist's assistant glanced over. "Jenny, you wore white to both your weddings." Silence dropped like a heavy cloth. You don't need to add the rest. The insinuation sat between us like a third person at the table, fully present. Her mouth thinned. My parents' heads turned slowly, every parent's motion like the visual equivalent of a siren. The rehearsal music kept plucking the same nervous chord, and for one ridiculous suspended second, I could feel how everything I'd wanted, to be seen, to be rid of the quieter shapes of myself, had detonated into the single, sharp sound of family. Jenny's face changed from smug to shocked in a way that made me feel slightly triumphant and terribly alone at the same time. My words had landed where years of small jokes never had. The fallout was immediate and loud in the slow domestic way only family can manage, like someone opening a windowsill and letting an entire flock of pigeons out at once. Jenny grabbed her bag and left before anyone could argue. She moved like someone who had decided the conversation was beneath her, and that she'd rather puncture the evening with her absence than stay to battle. The tent felt oddly huge after she slammed the car door. Chairs looked like islands. The florist kept apologizing like it was her fault. A familial grenade had just gone off under the crystal chandelier. My parents did what my parents do best. They turned the situation into a moral lesson. Marcia's voice had the flattened calm of someone lecturing a child through a cracked vase. "Lisa, you should not have said that," she said, as if the words could be ironed flat and the crease removed. Tom, who always believes conflict is a procedural error to be fixed with a plan, suggested we all sit down and talk this out, which is how he says, have a meeting. They were furious, not at Jenny at first, though she'd been the one to snip, but at the spectacle and at me for being the spark. This is our daughter's wedding, Marcia kept repeating, like a mantra that would make the offense evaporate. You've just embarrassed all of us. The word embarrassed landed like a flat-top, ugly stone and skipped across the surface of my spine. They wanted me to apologize. The phrasing varied with the mood, but the message was the same. Swallow it, smooth it over, make everyone comfortable again. You should have just sucked it up, my mother said at one point, and the room felt smaller with each repetition. My father, with the practical, exhausted look people get when their dreams of a calm family afternoon are ransacked, said the same thing with less heat, but more disappointment. I understood what they were protecting. The choreography of a day that is supposed to be polished and painless. The way people like to show up and celebrate without looking at the scuffed parts under the rug. I knew that an apology would have been a band-aid for the wedding day, and a concession for every time Jenny had laughed at me in public. It would have been a chemical eraser, not for the sting, but for the record of it. And that felt wrong. I tried to explain. I told them how small cuts build up, how 1,000 seemingly little jests and corrections and eyebrow lifts leave you hollowed out. I told them that the comment came from a place I had been trying to keep private because I was so tired of being the family's comic relief. I used words like hurt and history, and I watched them weigh those words and decide which were convenient. They didn't accept it. This is not the time, Marcia said. You're making this about you when it should be about David and the ceremony. There was a real belief that weddings are an immunity cloak. For 2 hours, the family must be civilized or socially dead. Apologize, my father said, low and final. I made the decision then not to apologize. It felt like the only honest thing I had left. Saying sorry for pushing back would have been saying sorry for existing as I did. Messy, complicated, and occasionally incandescent. My parents looked younger than their age for a second, as if my refusal had reminded them that their idea of me wasn't the whole story. Then they sighed and returned to the crowd control of the day, attempting to scrub the edges off the mess. That night, after the last light had been stashed and the tent's drapery folded like exhausted birds, I escaped to David. He was waiting in the kitchen with wine and an odd comfort. The kind men sometimes bring home when you need permission to be unperfect. He listened without the frantic repair that my parents offered. He let me spill the whole thing, the way Jenny had sounded, the way my mom's disappointment felt like a recalibration of my very existence, how small and huge at once the whole scene had been. You did the right thing, David said quietly, and the words felt like an ally stepping into a battleground. He didn't make it dramatic. He made it true. You stood up for yourself. If someone's going to keep cutting you down, you don't have to take the cuts just because it's a wedding. He put his hand on the base of my skull in that absent domestic way we had, the way you steady a glass. And for the first time that day, I could breathe without apologizing for the way I inhaled. Jenny called the next morning while I was at the sink, rinsing out a vase the florist had insisted would really tie the table together. Her voice on the phone was a careful, practiced calm, the same voice she uses when she's scheduling a doctor's appointment. I don't understand why you'd bring up my marriages like that, she said. That wasn't necessary, Lisa. I could hear the hurt in her too, but it was braided with the old automatic armor. For a second, I pictured her in her car, hands clenched around the steering wheel, making herself small with tidy thoughts. I wasn't trying to humiliate you, I said, letting the water run between my fingers. I was pissed. You keep making fun of me, Jenny, for years. Today I snapped. She sounded genuinely surprised. I never thought you took it so seriously, she said. We've always joked. It's how we are. That's the problem, I said. It's the way you use jokes to shape the room. To make everyone look at the same easy thing and laugh. You do it with my clothes, my job, my relationships. You told my boss I was eccentric, like it was a career move. You laughed when I bought my first real painting and asked if it came with an IKEA receipt. You announced at Thanksgiving that my degree was a cute hobby in front of my extended family. You once told my date he was settling like it was comic relief. The list came out fast, a breathless inventory of little betrayals I'd carried like loose change. You laughed when I said I wanted to decorate my apartment with antiques, I continued. You told Mom I was too dramatic when I cried about Dad's favorite dog dying. You compared every man I dated to some hypothetical better draft in your head. You told me not to wear the blue dress to Mom's birthday because people will judge. You left a review on one of my shows that basically called my work a quirky side project. You gave away my earrings at a yard sale when I was 21 and called it decluttering. Silence fell on the other end, like a dropped tray. The details were petty and precise, the way grievance usually is when it's held long enough to become a thing in itself. I could hear Jenny inhaling slow, the way someone does when they realize they've been described in a language they find unfamiliar. I didn't know you remembered all that, she said finally, quiet and a little small. I thought we were being sisterly. You mocked the costume I wore to prom, I added, because fairness demands specifics. You told Dad I was dramatic at graduation. You once, at my 25th birthday, pretended you were raising your eyebrow at my choices, and everyone laughed, and I sat there like the punchline. Her voice wobbled then, a human thing to witness. I'm sorry I made you feel like that, she said. I didn't realize it landed like that. I thought I was teasing. Teasing that leaves me shrinking, I said. That's not harmless to me. It's like you keep trimming me down until I fit the shape you're comfortable with. She hesitated, a small, awkward pause that felt like the hinge of a door. Look, she said, I'll stop. I won't make fun of your choices. Not in front of people. Not today. Not at the wedding. I don't want to ruin this for you. Relief was immediate and muddy. It wasn't triumphant. It was practical, like someone handing you a bandage for a fresh scrape. Thank you, I said. Not for pretending to be perfect, just for not doing the thing that keeps making me feel small. There was something timid and unfamiliar in her tone after that, an outline of contrition that made me cautious. I can try to be more careful, she offered, but I can't promise I won't slip. It's who I am sometimes. Then don't promise anything else, I said. Just try, for the wedding at least. Okay, she said, for the wedding. It felt like a ceasefire more than a surrender. She hadn't apologized for everything. She'd offered postponement instead of repair, but she'd made a concrete concession, silence on the wedding day. It was small and huge at the same time. I pictured her at the reception, lips closed where she usually had a sharpness ready, and imagined myself walking down the aisle without wondering if every laugh at the head table had a hidden barb for me. When I hung up, I stood in the kitchen with the damp vase in my hand and felt oddly lighter and oddly wary. The compromise smelled faintly of diplomacy. Not entirely clean, but useful. I texted David a one-line update, and he answered with a thumbs up and 2 heart emojis, because marital allies are good at simplicity. The rest of the day moved like a tide. Small preparations, final fittings, last-minute calls with vendors who thought familial drama was someone else's problem. The practical parts of life, the seating chart, the soup tasting, the emergency kit of safety pins, felt friendlier than the abstract idea of family. I didn't expect Jenny's change to mend everything. People don't untangle their habit ropes in an afternoon, but the promise was a kind of currency. It bought me the ceremony I wanted without the background noise of being quietly diminished. It didn't fix the past. It didn't make my parents change their immediate disappointment. It did, however, guarantee that the one day I had carved out to be unabashedly myself would not be cataloged later with a laugh and a cutting aside. That night, David and I sat on the couch with the wedding invitations stacked like small, excited towers. He took my hand and I watched his fingers, the way they fit into mine like they were built at the same factory. You did right, he said again, steady and oddly soft. You asked for what you needed. Maybe that's what it came down to, not justice in some grand cinematic sense, but the older, quieter thing. Setting a boundary and making it hold for at least one important day. The rest would take longer. For now, the rococo poles still gleamed in my imagination, and for the first time in a long while, I could picture myself walking between them, without a shadow at my heels.